Some of Bryan Kohberger's fans are so rabid, they are so pro-burger, that any mention of the man's name just brings backlash. I've watched over the years as some of his fans just wax nostalgic or wax romantic about his skin and his vegan diet and his height, I guess his presumed intelligence or evil wit, his beautiful hair. Maybe that's why this new book is gaining backlash already months before it's even published. Perhaps also because the authors are well-known, famous names.
Hey everybody, so quick update on a Thursday night because some of you have pointed out that I have been AWOL this week. Well, I haven't really been AWOL. I've been proofing the Idaho 4 and making sure that the book is up to date with some of the very important developments that occurred in court in Boise, Idaho last week. Separately,
the book is called The Idaho 4, An American Tragedy. Now, it's not scheduled to be published until July 14th, 2025, but that hasn't stopped the controversy from starting. This appears to be no fly-by-night type of book, and it's not some random person promoting this new book either. I love it when the family members of the victims of horrible crimes, they work together with authors or documentarians to give their input about the victim. They keep the victim in the forefront. They can offer input in a way that no other reporter could. This is what happened with the recent Gabby Petito Netflix documentary. Gabby's family, her loved ones were all in and through that documentary. Her friends, they gave us insight. They told us things we didn't know. That is also what I'm hoping for this Idaho 4 book, An American Tragedy. It's authored by James Patterson. You probably know that name very well.
But that goes right back to Idaho in terms of those questions we must have answered.
Yeah, no, my mom is a huge fan of Alex Cross and obviously of your writing. So I think that she will be already has ordered it off of Amazon. Help me understand.
I like your mom, and I like you better because of your mom.
It's also authored by Vicky Ward, and Vicky has actually spoken out on her Substack about turning in the manuscript and doing final tweaks to update the book before it goes to its final publisher.
hey everybody, I'm back. I just handed in the first draft of the manuscript of the book about the college murders in Idaho, and when the time is right, I look forward to telling you all about this extraordinary journey I've been on with James Patterson, the extraordinary people I've met, and what an amazing place Moscow, Idaho truly is. But for now, it's election season. There are so many things I want to write about, talk to you about.
Already it's listed as a #1 release in Murder and Mayhem True Accounts on Amazon. And best believe I want to order this book because it looks very detailed.
America's best-selling author in history.
Yeah, I don't know that the book is going to come out before the trial, but we're working on it right now. Vicky Ward and I, who's a very, very good journalist.
So, despite at least one family member of the victims promoting this book, and likely many more family members giving their input, since there are more than 300 interviews in this book, there's already backlash about the Idaho 4 book, and we'll talk about that at the end. Let me tell you a little bit about the book first, what I've been able to find out. On Instagram, the mother of one of the Idaho 4 victims chimed in and she posted it to her story. I think that's how I found out about it. Now, recently, Stacy Chapin, she's the mother of Ethan Chapin, one of the 4 victims. She wrote, "Finally, we've worked tirelessly with Vicky Ward and James Patterson to ensure our," and she capitalized our, O-U-R, our version of Ethan is correctly represented. So much respect for these people. Now that's the mom of one of the victims saying, look, we work with these people to make sure how Ethan's depicted is basically how we know Ethan. Can you imagine if your son were horribly killed in some kind of tragic murder, someone coming in his home or his girlfriend's home, as it were, and slashing them up, and then you go through, I can't imagine, unimaginable grief. But these two big names in publishing come along and you offer your input into what your son was really like, his positive attributes. You know the Chapins have done a lot, along with other families, to represent their loved one, their victims, as best they could in the media. And then imagine going online when the book is announced to the world and people start calling it, quote, a cash grab, or even giving Vicky, one of the authors, backlash for dubbing Bryan Kohberger, quote, an apparent incel in her description. Whoa boy, I'm sure that's sending the Kohberger fans off the roof somewhere. Now I understand, Bryan Kohberger has to have his due process. He looks like he's got a great attorney, a great defense team. He has to be represented well. He needs his due process, and all the real evidence has to be laid out. I totally agree with that. But for people going off on Vicky for just hinting that Bryan may have been an incel, involuntarily celibate, that's a whole nother ball of wax. She's probably right. This is not to say Bryan Kohberger is guilty. This is to say he is innocent until proven guilty, if he's ever proven guilty. I know there's controversy lately about other male DNA found, about Bryan's state of mind or his condition, or if he has autism, whether he should be subjected to the death penalty. There's so much controversy going on right now. How much of that will be covered in this book, and how will they attack it? Did these authors talk to any of Bryan Kohberger's childhood friends? I hope so. Perhaps even ex-girlfriends, or anyone who might give us a more detailed insight into Kohberger. Well, the description reads as follows. The murders of 4 innocent college students attending the University of Idaho left us with so many questions. Now, after over 300 interviews, that kind of gets my goat. I always switch it in my mind to now, after more than 300 interviews, I'm glad they conducted so many interviews. James Patterson and prize-winning journalist Vicky Ward finally have some answers. We know what it was like to live in Moscow, Idaho on November 13th, 2022, the day of the cold-blooded killings. Now this is interesting. We know what the local police and FBI did right and what they did wrong. That'll be interesting to see their take on what police did wrong in this case. We've learned so much about the 4 heartbroken families, the Mogans, the Gonzalveses, the Kernodles, and the Chapins. And we have the backstory for Bryan Kohberger. Brilliant grad student, loner, a parent incel, now indicted and facing trial. That was the line that at least one person has taken issue with so far. They skipped right over the notion that Bryan was called a brilliant grad student by Vicky and a loner. It's just that incel word that people were like, oh no. Vicky wrote, now you are the jury. The evidence is in. So Vicky has taken to her Substack, and I like following her. Vicky Ward's Investigates. You can find links to all my sources below to see her progress, when she turned in the manuscript, when she talks about any snippets of the book. I've also requested excerpts. So Vicky, or James, if you happen to catch this YouTube video, please, Lord, let them catch it. Please send excerpts to me, especially anything about Bryan, because we've got a while before this book comes out. We've got March, April, May, June. We've got 4.5 months, and we've got even longer until the trial starts. Vicky has also written a little bit more on social media about the book. She wrote, The Idaho 4, An American Tragedy. My new book, published by Little Brown and Company and co-authored with the wonderful James Patterson, will be published July 14th, 2025. Thank you to all the people who helped along the way. I'm so excited to share it with the world soon. Click the link in my bio to find out more and to pre-order the book. Now, James Patterson, for his part, his people, or James himself, also wrote, announced today. The Idaho 4, a true story about terrifying student murders, to be published in July. He wrote, "The last time a true crime story haunted me this deeply was Jeffrey Epstein's shocking tale. Award-winning journalist Vicki and I have spent months on exclusive interviews with the families and on-the-ground reporting from Idaho." So they were in Idaho, I think, for quite a bit. Vicki's going to joke about joining the police department, and James is saying he spoke with the families. So I hope they spoke with all the family members, as many as possible, of all 4 victims, to again keep the victims in the forefront. They were the victims of this horrific tragedy. They were young, beautiful, vivacious, lively college students just cut down so horrifically, so gruesomely in the prime of their lives, just ready to move forward and start living their lives. So I'm grateful that this book has them on the cover, that famous photo, that famous last photo with the 4 victims on the cover. James wrote, "The Idaho 4 will put readers right there in Moscow, Idaho, on the night of the murders. Read more at link in my bio." Now, Vicki gave us even more insight via her Substack about the book itself. On February 13th, 2025, just a couple of weeks ago, Vicki wrote on her Substack, "Dear readers, here it is. The Idaho 4, An American Tragedy. My new book, published by Little Brown and Company, co-authored with the wonderful James Patterson. The pub date is July 14th. You can pre-order it here. This book is much different from my previous tomes, which, as you know, focus on the apex of money, power, politics, and the culture. But it's this one which I feel most personally engaged. So this is a departure for Vicki. She's written other books, I guess, about politicians that I don't think I've read. She wrote, "First, there's my partnership with James Patterson," and she calls him Jim, apparently. She wrote, "I barely knew Jim when we embarked on this, and he barely knew me. I'd articulated that there was something about this story that touched me. Most obviously that my sons are college students and the same age as the victims. To Bill Robinson, an old friend. Bill runs Jim's business empire. And the next minute Jim was on the phone telling me that what happened had touched him too, so quote, let's do it together." I can understand that. Parents around my age, parents of college students, you do have such a heart for these 4 victims. Just out there living their lives, going to the food truck, getting home late at night, and all of a sudden some stranger in wearing a mask, apparently carrying something that looked like a vacuum, according to one of the victims. There's more info coming out. Disrupts their entire lives. Of course, many people like me, even young people who are college students, I'm sure everyone is enthralled, intrigued, just trying to figure out who did this and why. What was the point? What did the killer gain by striking down 4 people? Notoriety? Infamy? What were they going for? Was it like inspired by Ted Bundy or someone? And we know back in the day, there were people who fangirled out over Ted Bundy because they found him handsome and charming too. These same people, I often wonder, who are leaving, bad comments or who really love Bryan Kohberger for the wrong reasons. I wonder if they had a child, if one of those victims was their child, and if they had gone through the same pain these families are experiencing. I mean, Ethan was a triplet, I was just thinking about today. And those beautiful tulip gardens, the beautiful memorial garden Ethan's parents created, and just so many things. You think of the losses of so many people here. If a person had suffered the same fate, one of their children was felled by some stranger in the middle of the night, would they really get online and start saying the same things, or would they have more compassion about people trying to tell the story with all the facts in the correct way? Vicki wrote, "I had no idea how this partnership would work. Jim is the best-selling fiction writer in the world, and I am just me," Vicki wrote, which is not nothing, but it's not him. Indeed, many of us, even if we've never read a James Patterson book in our lives, we've heard the name. And I looked him up. I'm going to read his bio. He's not just a fiction writer. He also focuses on nonfiction, too. Vicki wrote, "He phoned me early on and told me he'd spent the weekend reading my earlier book, Kushner Inc., and that he'd got the point of it, but he was clear that he did not want this new book of ours to feel like Kushner, Inc. He was clear that we were not going to stand 40,000 feet above our subject matter, reporting dispassionately in the style of the New York Times, as if it had nothing to do with us. Interesting. Was that a sick burn or just, no, an observation? No, he said, this book should feel personal. Through us, readers should feel that they are in the small town of Moscow, Idaho. They should feel there with the victims and their friends on that college campus of the University of Idaho as tragedy strikes, and there with the townsfolk, with the victims' families, and law enforcement through the uncertainty, fear, and fallout of the coming days, weeks, and months. That's good. That's what people need to see. They need to feel the heart-to-heart reaction of the tragedy on a college campus, right off of a college campus, and the fear it struck in the hearts of people, which of course was the perpetrator's goal, I'm sure. But perhaps if people get more of the story of the victims' families and friends and the fear and everything, the trauma it caused, maybe they won't be so ready to look at Bryan Kohberger as some kind of handsome hero or whatever people are thinking of him. Vicky wrote, I will be honest, I was nervous to try to write his way. It felt like negating years of training and rules about objectivity. But I began to realize he was pushing me to report differently, to ask my sources not just the details of what happened, but what it had felt like while it happened. In other words, I had to ask people to trust me, to get inside their heads and relive what they'd lived. Of course, he was right to push me. We are very proud of the end product. Journalistic integrity is absolutely still there. The book has 25,000 words of footnotes at the end, so we know this is a huge book. I think it's like 400 pages. The audio version will be like 10 and a half hours. So the book has 25,000 words of footnotes at the end, but we don't feel like we are looking in from the outside. We feel that we are in it, living it. Vicky wrote, this is not just a story about a horrific mass homicide. It's the story of a close-knit, small American town turned upside down. It's also a story about modern culture and the internet and the dark side of social media. Boy, they'll find out. And fundamentally about all of us. Another novelty was that, per Jim, I was not to stay at a distance from my, quote, sources. No. After the journey we've been on and the harrowing things we've had to talk about, I now consider most of the sources of this book close friends. They include some of the victims' family members, their college friends, the former police chief James Fry, and various local professionals whom will you meet on the pages. It's always bittersweet when a book is nearing publication. It's so exciting that people get to read what you've been working on in private. At the same time, it almost feels like a form of farewell to many of the book's subjects. The people you've been on the phone to almost daily, the people who in this case feel like extended family. But I'm fairly sure that with the Idaho 4, it will be au revoir and not goodbye. Vicky ended with, I'm told there's a sweepstake in Moscow as to whether, once the book is out and the upcoming murder trial is over, I will move there permanently and join the Moscow Police Department. It's not so far-fetched an idea as you might think. The great thing about being a writer is that you never know what's around the corner. Meanwhile, Jim and I really look forward to talking to you more about the book in July. So, now more book details. It is a whopping 400 pages. The Kindle version will be $16.99. Again, the audiobook duration is 10 and a half hours. The hardcover will be $32.50. The paperback will be $34.50. Those are the prices listed right now. Now, before we get to this backlash, let's learn a little bit about James Patterson since we read so much of Vicky's words. James Patterson is the most popular storyteller of our time. He's the creator of unforgettable Characters in series, including Alex Cross. Oh, that's a recent one. They did a really great update of that one. The Women's Murder Club, Jane Smith, Maximum Ride, and of breathtaking true stories about the Kennedys, John Lennon, Tiger Woods, as well as our military heroes, police officers, and ER nurses. Patterson has co-authored #1 best-selling novels with Bill Clinton, Dolly Parton, Michael Crichton. He's told the story of his own life in James Patterson by James Patterson and received an Edgar Award, 10 Emmy Awards, the Literarian Award from the National Book Foundation, and the National Humanities Medal. Alrighty, now let's get to the backlash. Once news of this book coming out started to spread, different places online, already some people are like, yes, I want to buy it, just like me. I totally want to pre-order this book. I don't know if I'll do the audio book. I'm one for trying to read words. A lot of times I will buy books and I get so busy I only read half of them, but this is one I plan to read the entire book and hopefully go over with you. Hopefully I'll start getting some excerpts coming up. Usually before a book is published, they start giving out excerpts so we can at least get an idea of what's in here. Well, one Facebook user already wrote, quote, "With a strict gag order still in place, and the trial hasn't even happened, what's the point? Cash grab." Whoa. Can you imagine? The mother of one of the victims, came out publicizing this book saying it'll tell our viewpoint. We ensured Ethan will have a great viewpoint in this book the way we knew him. I'm paraphrasing, but I read her quote earlier. Imagine someone saying that in the wake of the mother of one of the victims, Stacy Chapin, giving her thumbs up to this book. And apparently more family members contributed too. Immediately this person talks about the gag order, talks about the trial not happening yet. Now, those are granted, I understand, but what's the point? Cash grab. Whew, that's harsh to me. Especially if the victims' families read that. Are they saying only the authors are worried about a cash grab and Stacy, the victim's loved one, too, is going with a cash grab? Maybe they don't realize the families have contributed their viewpoints to this book. Well, one person replied, "It literally says, so our version of Ethan is represented correctly." And then this person who criticized initially said, "I understand that, but why release a book before the trial or before any meaningful conclusion takes place?" Well, I understand what they're saying. Yes, there is a gag order in place. I'm not even remembering exactly who it covers. I know there was some controversy about who exactly does this gag order cover. My question is, I don't know how long James and Vicky have been working on this book. Somewhere in here, she talked about working on it for years. Now, this News Nation video I previously linked to, it has plenty of backlash too. Well, it was recorded back in 2023. So James Patterson has been working on this book for quite a while. The date of that News Nation video interview was June 6, 2023. So James Patterson has been working on this book with Vicky for a while, potentially before the gag order was enacted. Also, according to Variety, Amazon Prime Video has ordered a docuseries about the 2022 Idaho murders, and a separate scripted series is also in the works. Now, the docuseries is from Skydance Television and Story Syndicate. That docuseries will be based on this upcoming book, this upcoming nonfiction book about the murders by James Patterson and Vicky Ward. So both the docuseries and the scripted series stem from James Patterson's first look deal with Skydance. So expect plenty more backlash, as not only will this book appear, but an Amazon Prime Video docuseries. But the docuseries will also feature exclusive interviews with the family of the victim Ethan Chapin and also the mother and stepfather of Maddie Mogan. The directors of the series made a statement saying, "We are honored that the Chapin and Laramie families have decided to exclusively collaborate with us to shine a light on the personal stories of Ethan and Madison, as well as Xana and Kaylee. Our unparalleled access to the families and closest friends will allow us to paint intimate and authentic portraits of all four victims and their lives at the University of Idaho, which were so tragically cut short. We couldn't ask for better partners than Skydance and James Patterson Entertainment to help bring the definitive telling of this important story to the world. So this will be the second scripted series on the murders after Village Roadshow Television acquired the rights to Howard Blum's book, When the Night Comes Falling. So what's different about these books is the level of participation of the families. However, I'm sure they will both court plenty of controversy from naysayers who just don't agree. So I don't know when they were in Moscow, I don't know when they conducted these interviews, but if they conducted all of them or the bulk of them prior to the gag order being in place, and especially with people who were not covered under the gag order, then I'm sure that's probably fine. For example, I don't expect necessarily to see contained within this book the surviving roommates' words. I don't expect James and Vicky to have sat down with the surviving roommates and conducted deep interviews about what happened that night. No, that's the kind of stuff we will find out about in the trial. And who's to say when is the proper time to write about a tragedy, especially with the loved ones involved? Who's to tell the victims' loved ones, oh no, it's too soon, you shouldn't contribute to this book, it's a cash grab? That's just beyond the pale to me. First of all, this tragedy took place November 13th, 2022. By this November, if the trial is over by then, that will have been 3 years since the tragedy. I mean, there's other crimes out there that we're still waiting on them to go to trial, and it may have been even longer. So I understand there's a place and a time for everything, but you don't have to wait until a trial is over to write about a tragedy. First of all, they can write about many things going on in Moscow that day, how people felt when they got the news. They can talk with the victims' loved ones about just what kind of person was Maddie. What kind of person was Kaylee? More in depth than we've even heard, like Kaylee buying her new car, Kaylee and Maddie being such close friends. What did Xana go through in her life? All these things are things that won't change based on waiting on the trial. So that kind of negates that argument, in my opinion. And even digging into Bryan Kohberger's background, which we've done quite a bit already. Whether he's found not guilty or what have you, it won't change his background. From us learning about Bryan Kohberger writing about experiencing visual snow, or writing about all these different things we've learned about him working at that fishery, and he wasn't good with cutting the fish, and his weight loss, more than 100 pounds, and all of that doesn't change. Digging into his history won't be impacted. It doesn't mean you have to wait for the trial for that stuff to be written about. So to me, that argument doesn't totally hold water, but check out the next backlash comment that an Instagram user wrote to Vicky. A parent incel? Shaking my head, he was not. First of all, how would this person so resolutely declare that Bryan wasn't an incel, that he wasn't involuntarily celibate? They're saying he could get all the girls he wanted? I don't know what they're saying. They wrote, sounds like just another hit piece with lots of misinformation aimed at polluting the jury pool with sensationalism and making money off of this tragedy. This person wrote, the timing of the release makes it very clear, just another money grab. Now with them saying money grab, is this the same person that wrote the other comment on Facebook? Who knows? The thing is, why is it angering them so much? Why are they so resolutely, going off on Vicky just stating a parent incel? They wrote, there's a gag order in place. Now they're mentioning the same thing, so they have the same talking points. Even if you try and pretend there isn't, I bet it has the same debunked rumors and misinterpreted information the other books are full of, like stalking or him following them on social media that both prosecution and defense denied. Now I do admit that person might have a point there. Towards the beginning, what the problem is that as soon as Bryan Kohberger was announced as the arrested suspect in the Idaho 4 murders, I hate when people do this, but so many copycats got on Instagram and created Bryan Kohberger accounts, taking his pictures, pretending like they were Kohberger and following the victims. Several accounts did that. Now, we don't know if any of those were genuine or they were all faked, if they were all fake. So unfortunately, different publications picked up on, oh, Kohberger was definitely following the victims. He was definitely messaging some of them. He was definitely stalking some of them, when all of that may not be true. We still just don't have all the evidence yet, again, because the trial hasn't happened. So I understand when readers and viewers want to make valid points like that and saying, wait, mainstream media may have gotten this wrong. But it's a whole nother ballgame to take it, 180 degrees the opposite direction and start talking about Bryan couldn't have done it. Look at all these other two men's DNA, and there's no way he's guilty, and he's handsome and intelligent, and it starts going in another direction where it's too pro Kohberger. I think it's best to kind of stay neutral and see what the evidence bears out. Now this person starts attacking Vicky's research. Well, I'm sure Vicky has done much more research than this person, giving her backlash on Instagram. They wrote, have you read a single court document or watched a single court hearing? I'm sure she's probably been all up and down through the state of Idaho versus Bryan C. Kohberger and the case summaries and the court documents and everything to write this book. I mean, she just talked in her latest video about adding additional facts as they come out. The person wrote, they're the only sources of information on the case. Well, that's not necessarily true either.
You guys have done a lot of your own reporting on this. Is there anything you've uncovered so far that's not in the public record?
Yeah, but we're not telling it tonight.
Because if Vicky and James are able to interview Stacy, for example, or whomever, obviously she's able to give some insight about just not necessarily the active case, but just Ethan growing up or whatever she's experienced. I mean, I think it might have been Stacy, definitely, memory serving. Stacy was the one who initially wrote, I think the other roommates heard something. She had written that, I remember years ago, and I believed it because I was like, okay, Stacy is saying, okay, the other roommates weren't necessarily asleep. The other roommates heard something. And indeed, Stacy was correct because later it came out that one of the roommates actually saw the perpetrator. Not only did they hear things, like it's borne out in the court documents, but they also, one of them saw the perpetrator. So it's not true that only the court documents or only the court hearings are the only sources of information on the case. Stacy and other people obviously have information not only about the case, but the victims obviously as well that we wouldn't have. This person continued, and the latest hearings shed a lot of light on the many issues in the investigation and how misleading probable cause affidavit is, mainly regarding car footage, phone data. They wrote, police found 2 unidentified male blood DNA on the handrail in the house and glove outside. Now that is something that has been brought out more recent, and we've seen these court documents. One of them is huge. Oh my goodness, the latest transcript. It's 175 pages. So there's a lot of information still coming out. But I find it so interesting that this person giving Vicky backlash did not care to mention anything about Kohberger's DNA found on the button on the sheath of the knife that was recovered underneath one of the victims. Like the judge said, isn't that probable cause, every day? And 6 ways on Sunday or 3 ways on Sunday, whatever he said. People kind of skip over that part of it. What Bryan was doing, out driving around, and where's his alibi. They don't dig into the strangeness of all that. Anyway, this person wrote, only one video from Moscow is clear enough to identify the car as Hyundai Elantra. And it's not the one from King Road, according to this person. Car on King Road is unidentifiable. Phone car records show he was never near or on King Road before the murders, passing by or stationary. So there was no stalking. I bet there's no mention about any of that in there. Well, there very well could be. We don't know because none of us has read the book. Only Vicky and James have written it. I haven't seen any excerpts anywhere as of this recording. I hope to find some. To me, it's kind of unfair to be like, whoa. Unfortunately, I feel like James and Vicky will get a lot of whoa from people who aren't just saying, let's be objective, let's look at all the facts, let's wait, let's be patient. They are like viscerally like, oh, how dare you criticize my Bryan? I don't understand people who, this guy becomes symbolic of something. The patron saint of incels, is that it? Just like the Luigi guy is, people are hyping him up as a patron saint. Anyway, who is the real person? What is their motivation for such backlash against a book we don't even know the contents completely yet? Are they related to Bryan? What's the case for fighting so vehemently for his innocence? Is this a move? What is this? That's my question. Another unfair comment that James Patterson got on Instagram says, "The third book already? Don't mean to be cynical, but it would be much better to release a book after the trial is over instead of putting out the same old information and speculation." I think that's pretty unfair because it's not the third book that James is writing about the Idaho 4 case. Perhaps they're talking about 3 books, the third book with 2 other people writing books. I don't know who they're including in that, but it's unfair. It's also unfair to assume that James and Vicky are putting out the same information when they're the ones who traveled to Moscow, stayed there for months, conducted more than 300 interviews, and before their work is even published, to be receiving comments from people who haven't read hide nor hair of this book, claiming, oh, it's the same old stuff, same old speculation. It's just completely unfair, and it shows, talk about a rush to judgment. Those are the kind of people you don't want on a jury. So anyway, the state of Idaho versus Bryan C. Kohberger, it's got a lot of case summary documents, everything going on. As of this recording, which is on March 1st, 2025, the next motion hearing is scheduled for April 9th, 2025 at 9 a.m. local time. Another one, April 16th, 2025, unless they get rescheduled. You know how this goes. Another one for May 15th, the pre-trial conference. There's more hearings scheduled for July 21st, July 30th, and then supposedly August 11th, the jury trial will begin at 8:30 a.m. Whether it truly will begin then or not remains to be seen. You know how these huge trials are with all this data. I mean, it's a lot different from the days of Truman Capote, who wrote In Cold Blood. Now I'm wondering if that will be kind of in this style, since James Patterson is such a great, especially fiction, novel writer. Will it kind of read like In Cold Blood, or with Vicky's input, how will it flow? But I'm very fascinated. As we wait for a trial, we might as well read a book and figure out what we can figure out, and just remain objective. Not condemning Bryan Kohberger before he's had a chance to stand trial and the facts come out, but also not hyping him up like he's Jesus, or something. Not lifting him up to some, oh, there's no way he can be guilty, and looking for all this exculpatory evidence to say, see, it could have been that, or that glove outside, or somebody else, or I don't understand that type of fangirling out over this man. Some people love a bad boy. In every case, you will always get people who aren't just being objective. They're not just saying, let's wait for our due process. We're all citizens. We all deserve a great defense. Some people go beyond that. And with this book, I can already see it's going to happen, where as more and more people learn about it, being published, on its way, huge book, big name, James Patterson, huge name attached to it. I'm sure the backlash will increase also from a small segment of people who just automatically assume Bryan could have never done this. His skin's too good. He's too much of a vegan. He looks too good. He's too tall. He lost weight. And I don't know. It's just weirdness to me. But stay tuned for updates. Whenever I get excerpts, I plan to do another video. Let's close with Genesis 8:22. As long as the earth endures, seed time and harvest, cold and heat, summer and winter, day and night will never cease. Thank you so much for watching all this. Look at the links below if you want to see where the book is and all that stuff, or order it. Take care.